The Knaf that American servicemen of the last generation counted on to open their meal packets.
Yes, I got skills.
The knife that preppers unanimously favor.
66 hours, get bug, down-home butterfly bag, and this is the knife I put in it.
To keep in their bags. The knife that our father in flannel has chosen as his favorite.
Alright, some other survival knives I use. My favorite survival knife is the SE4.
To pry apart cedar stumps.
Pry apart cedar stumps, start fires, all that type of thing.
Designed by Jeff Randall and Mike Perrin. Two genuinely awesome gentlemen with far more field experience than most people on planet Earth. Bless their hearts. The legendary SE4 has now, for the stainless version, chosen a super steel. It is time for a below average adventurer to give it a review.
Children, boys, men, ladies, if you're new here, welcome. If you're from the paintball scene, welcome back. We're treading new fields this time around. We're headed to the wild, where we will be reviewing our first Knaf on this channel, the Escuela de Supervivencia, Evasión y Escape Modelo 4, aka the SE4. In S35VN steel. The Knaf that I chose to complete the Randall's Adventure and Training Field Survival course with.
While there is plenty to talk about regarding field survival and how much land nav and compass work you'll do as well as straight up Knaf use, we're leaving that for another time, if at all. Just know that those are essentially the only tools you're allowed to bring with you, as well as learn to practice how to apply those skills in not only a survival situation, but in any situation where you're in the wilderness by yourself or with a small group.
Just know that the most important 6 inches in any man in a survival situation are between his ears, not beyond his Knaf's handle. I learned that reading this book. Totally recommend it. When we review products, it's quite different than what we say when we review an experience, a service, or some food. When we review a product, we're usually talking about how useful the product is. Being pretty only gets you so far, and fortunately for Esee, they're quite proud of the fact that they make some pretty ugly yet very useful tools, and in the case of the SE4, it's a ugly yet very useful tactical Knaf.
Going on a leisurely stroll. Oh, tactical threat! Stop right there! Bam back! Bam back! Bam back! Where's my shoe? Can't look at it. Leisurely stroll continues.
Well, you see, Madman, a tactical knife is just a utility knife with versatile mounting options, including contemplation towards concealment. Could you please tactically retreat from the frame and conceal yourself? Thanks. You may have noticed that I've messed with this Knaf a little bit, and it's quite different from the factory configuration. My SE4 isn't entirely in factory condition. I got it with flat orange G10 scales and got some burlap and linen micarta 3D scales for it because I changed my mind about what I wanted, really. I thought I would do fine with the flat and orange, but just changed my mind. And second, I grinded the bevel into a convex edge for a couple of particular reasons. First is because I sharpen by hand, and when you sharpen by hand, it wants to convex. So if you intentionally convex the edge, you're embracing the vex, and you're going to have a better convex than an accidental one.
I took that factory flat grind and bevel and ground it a little bit more like another Knaf I own and enjoy that really cuts deep into material. Look at Garantham's SE4. He's sharpened it enough to have convexed it as well. And speaking of the original, it has been around for a while in good old 1095. And the 440C option was also available, but it was sort of regarded as the compromise version, even though it was pretty good. But when Esee changed their stainless steel of choice for the Zancudo and SE3 to S35VN, people fell in love with them. That SE3 is usually out of stock because people keep buying it. This is huge for Esee. They're known for embracing simplicity and sticking with the tried and true 1095. And they have valid reasons, but that's also been a reason for some people to dismiss them as too old school to be compelling.
The price for the steel, I mean, it's $10.95 and you pay $170 for it.
Yeah. Internet arguments about other people's knife steels aside, I do believe that the SE4 and S35VN is going to be a bit more compelling of a choice over $10.95 for most people.
I found that thanks to the thicker stock over the SE3, you probably won't have to worry about breaking the 4 in heavy-duty tasks like batoning, which, in general, SEs are notorious for shrugging off like nothing and making anti-batoners cringe hard. It's still much stiffer and harder, and therefore not as ductile as 1095, so you'll want to avoid putting it in a position where it will bend, but then again, it ate up this seasoned hardwood like nothing, which I needed to harvest to cook some noodles. It's reddish, has a squiggly grain that feathers horribly, and it's some of the hardest wood I've ever batoned. If any wood experts can identify it, that would rock. Even at home with some hardwood used for construction, going through a very hard knot.
It is a very strong Knaf. And in field survival in the middle of the night, we were split into 2 teams, and my team had finished a mission and we had some time to rest. Some of us decided to use that time to go find some fatwood which we had seen around in the woods. And as you may have guessed, I used the SE4 to
Pry apart cedar stumps.
to pry off chunks of fatwood. As you can see, it held up just fine, and it would have been funny, yes, to break an Esee knife at a rat course, but that didn't happen. Instead, I got to use it hard, and I can attest to the fact that it can pretty much baton anything that it can span. But big deal, right? Any thick piece of metal can split wood. The real question is, does it perform as a knife should after all that abuse? It does, and the feathers it makes are bellissimo, ragazzi. Ridiculously good. It also slices quite cleanly through fleshy material like fruit, and it lends itself well towards processing animals for food. It's a really good food prep knife, especially because it's uncoated. There was a point at the course where we were processing some chickens for big forest barbecue. And at that point, after using our knives plenty, the S35 SE4 was outcutting a 1095 SE3. We had used our knives plenty, and 1095 had already given out in terms of its edge. And I think that's another bonus about it being stainless. We didn't have to worry about using a rusty blade through food. And that just highlights one of the biggest pros about this Knaf, which is resiliency. You don't have to sharpen it much, you don't have to keep it clean all that much, because it's going to just hold up. And that stuff is really useful in a time-sensitive scenario. It held up just fine. As a matter of fact, after field survival, when I got home, I grabbed some thin newspaper like this and cut through with it with the knife. And I've been using it, as you can see, and it was just like that. Some slight snags here and there, but overall, it was still cutting slow through paper. And in the instances where it hasn't done that, I've been able to just grab a strop and spend a couple of minutes on each side, and it's back at hair popping sharp.
I don't know if it's thanks in part to the convex geometry of my edge, but edge stability here was also phenomenal. I bought this Knaf as soon as they started shipping, and I've used it a ton. I've used it hard, and I've never had its edge chip or roll or anything of that sort. It's very strong, but I'd be willing to bet that that's mostly because the bevel itself is pretty thick.
But that is where we introduce this Knaf's one big con, which is that it doesn't cut deep. If you can't wedge the material out of the way, you just simply won't cut deep. And that's thanks to the thick blade that you have here. It's a thick stock, and it isn't ground very thin, so that's what you get. You get a strong knife that doesn't cut deep. What that means is you're going to spend a little bit more time shaving off material for carving, or swinging your knife for chopping. That probably wasn't safe. Or you could use overwhelming force and just baton through material. That actually works fine, but you're gonna have to pick your poison. You either spend a little bit more time with it or you use up a little bit more force to get those tasks done. Don't confuse edge stability with blade toughness. The 1095 is gonna have better blade toughness than this will. The 1095 is gonna handle more abuse before it breaks, but the S35VN will deal better with the abuse it takes before it breaks. I hope that makes sense. If not, another way of saying it is that 1095 will slightly deform before the S35, but when this breaks, 1095 will still be in one piece. I think it's fair to say that for the SE4 to be the best survival Knaf it can be, it trades its right to call itself a bushcraft knife by trading in that ability to cut in deep for carving. But hey, that is totally okay. It doesn't have to be a dedicated bushcraft knife in order for it to be a terrific wilderness knife. I'm also not gonna hate on this not having a sharpened spine. I'm fine with that because I usually do a lot of two-handed work with my knives anyway. So I don't really miss the sharpened spine. Besides, I've learned to use something else to strike a fire steel, like my open L. Where's my open L? That makes a great ferro rod striker. So I always carry one in my pocket anyway. With the 3D scales, it's really comfortable and it's a handle that you can use all day, and I have used all day. Fits my large hands quite nicely, and of course, there's that half choil that you could use up for some fine work. I do that every once in a while, but it's a very comfortable knife and very easy to carry thanks to the sheath as well.
There's a lot to enjoy about the sheath as well. It's easy to carry, and it's also pretty comparable to Kydex. It's plastic injection molding. Keep in mind that doesn't mean that it's a class below Kydex. It's a pretty big upfront investment to make this happen, and it's a little bit more flexible than Kydex and a little bit more resilient too. Keyword resiliency, right? And this sheath is really good. It's very easy to carry, and it's versatile in terms of its mounting options. And it's also easy to, well, take the knife out and use it. Like, let's say you're tangled in briars, it's not fidgety at all. It's very easy to get that knife out, use it, and put it back. And that does not come at the cost of good retention.
SE4 and S35VN, man, it rocks, and it's a big deal because the SE4 is now available in a powdered steel, and that gives those consumers that would have dismissed the 1095 SE4 as something old school and would be otherwise compelled by Benchmade's 3V or Line Steel Sleipner or another knife. They have something to think about with this. And that's what's really special about powdered steels. It showed us how the SE4 in a stainless steel, powdered stainless, can outperform in many areas the carbon steel version of it, which is the 1095. And they really allow knife makers and manufacturers to do a lot more. Just imagine this, the SE4 in CPM 3V with the SE3's thickness. It'll keep both the cutting performance of the SE3 and the toughness of the SE4, and of course its size, and that would rock. Obviously, you probably thought about that before, and it's hard to execute, so is it necessary? No, but it certainly is really cool. And if we're talking about necessary, do we really even need knives? I love this Knaf, and not only is it a really good wilderness tool, it is also very resilient towards any use, abuse, and neglect. And for that, it earns the Triceratops Award. Now, let me know what your favorite survival Knaf is in the comments below. I appreciate the viewership. Please let me know if you would like to see more Knaf videos. I enjoyed making this one a lot and just had a lot of fun. To wrap up, you may have noticed that I snuck in a little something I learned from a book in the video, and that's this one, Call Sign Chaos by Jim Mattis. And the thing is, I love reading memoirs, and I want to encourage you to try reading some. Favorite athletes, they write memoirs. War generals, they write memoirs. Ordinary soldiers, they write memoirs. Politicians, they write memoirs. The thing is, when you read a memoir, you're basically getting a life lessons cheat sheet for your own life. So it's really good for you to just absorb other people's life experiences. Strongly recommend to read people you disagree with's memoirs. Like, let's say you don't like a politician and they just released a memoir, or you don't like that politician and they released their memoir a while ago. Read it. Read it. You might learn something about yourself. So that's all I've got for you. Later.